Hello folks, and welcome back to the Westport and Shelter Cove Railway. I believe this is update number 8. Now, last week's video was kind of a downer. This will hopefully be the opposite, because lots of progress has been made on the layout and there are some very exciting happenings. We'll start at this end of the layout. Now, you may notice first of all that I've got some ground cover down, I've got some clump foliage, got some gravel in between the turntable tracks, just give this a little bit more of a general yard look, a little bit overgrown here. That's really starting to come together, but the elephant in the room, or rather the plants in the room, are these trees. These are built from W&SC's realistic tree kit, that's what they're called. And first of all, fair warning, I don't fully recommend these. They are rather frustrating kits. Now the armatures are not that hard. They're basically just these plastic flat armatures that you bend into a tree shape. The difficult part is the foliage, which is just clump foliage. It's the same stuff that I put on the ground, and you have to glue it onto the branches. And this is a very frustrating process. W&SC recommends using a tacky glue, letting it dry, and then dipping it in the foliage, but I tried that and discovered that most of the foliage just falls right off. What I eventually ended up doing was super gluing one clump at a time onto the branches. Even that ended up a little crumbly because frankly, clump foliage is pretty crumbly stuff. So what I ended up doing was after super gluing them on, I soaked each tree through with diluted white glue, the same stuff that I used to hold my scenery down. The problem, of course, with this is that it makes it very heavy and some of the stuff does fall off the tree despite being super glued. But what's left is very firmly affixed. These trees are decently solid, and I think they're finally solid enough that they're not going to shed or fall apart. But it was quite an arduous journey getting to this point, so next time I'm probably just going to buy pre-made trees instead. While we're here, a couple of minor locomotive updates. I made a oil tank for the tender of the Prairie. I do still need to paint the tender. That is obviously not done yet. It's going to be maroon to match the engine. I think I forgot to mention this in the previous video, but number 13, my star passenger engine for the moment, has a new tender. This is the Vanderbilt tender that I originally bought for the Prairie, but I like it much better on this. It fits perfectly, it makes it look kind of like a Southern Pacific 10-wheeler. The foot plate height is exactly the same. Matter of fact, even the height of these running boards is the same, so if you sort of sight down the length of the engine, it looks like it was designed for it, and I think that's really cool. Also, can't remember if I ever mentioned this, number 8 is now a wood-fired engine. I do still need to put a wood-burning smokestack on it, though. Moving along this way, here's number 12 on static display at the end of the street. There's the TARDIS, and this is not strictly a layout update, but it is a locomotive update. This is my latest project. I was lucky enough to pick this up for 30 bucks. It is used and not in the greatest condition, but it'll be a fun fixer-upper, so expect to see a project video about this soon, hopefully. It's an older Mantua 2662 articulated logger, and it has some issues. For one thing, the cab is not attached, it just comes right off. It does run, but not terribly well. It's an old open frame motor and hasn't been serviced in a long time. It does actually run though, it's just kind of noisy and kind of wobbly. Wow, that's actually not too bad. That's better than it normally is. As soon as it hits a curve, you'll start to see the trouble. The driveline in this uses flexible rubber tubes to transmit power to the front engine, and they get stiff over time, so yeah, you can also kind of see it wobbling because there's a traction tire on the rear engine that's a little bit out of round. So yeah, it's actually getting around better than it did before when I tested it, but you can see it's wobbling pretty badly. It does run though, all the important stuff is there, and actually I'm going to let it lead us around here to the next big thing, the station. This is an Atlas kit. I'm guessing probably everyone has had one of these kits on their layout at some point, or at least all American HO modelers. Now, I built this more or less according to the instructions, but I also did some interesting things with it, chief among which was weathering, because it looked very plasticky to start off with. I did actually paint the walls, but I painted them almost the exact same color they already were, so you can't really tell. It just has a matte finish now. I also weathered the walls, doors, and window frames with a black wash, which I think helped bring out some of the 3D-ness of them and helped them look a little bit less pristine and plasticky. The base, I did a different weathering technique where you basically paint the whole thing black, make sure it gets into all the crevices, and then wipe it off the surface. That works really well for highlighting the deeper cracks in the concrete. The roof is a little bit different. I actually painted it with the same brownish gray paint that I used on the asphalt, which is a mix of my own devising. And then I did the black wash, and I also did some white dry brushing to bring out the highlights. And for the chimney, I did the same thing that I did on the base, but with white instead of black to make it look like the bricks had mortar lines. Now this station was really my first attempt at a building kit, and I'm pretty pleased with how it turned out. So now I would like to show you my second attempt at a building kit. the lighthouse. Now this is a Walthers Rocky Point lighthouse kit, and it's actually a much nicer kit to work with than the Atlas one. It's a bit easier to put together. A lot of stuff just snaps together, although I did glue it. I know I said in the last video that I was going to paint it white with green window frames to match a lighthouse in California, but after a while I looked at it and looked at the green scenery surrounding it and decided to just leave it red, because I do like the red. So instead I just used the same thing. I used a wash to weather it, I gave it a coat of matte clear to make it a little bit less plasticky, and I used a black wash around the window frames. I also did paint and weather the roof quite heavily. I painted it with, again, the same asphalt gray and the same dry brushing, and I went a bit heavier on the dry brushing on this one, and I think it gives it a nice weathered look. And I also weathered this around here. I think I might have gone overboard on the railings a little bit. The lighthouse tower itself I painted with matte white. It was originally sort of an off-white color and it looked okay, but I think it looks much more solid and much nicer now that it's not so plasticky. These bits up here, I spray painted black and then did some dry brushing on, and I think that really helps bring out the three-dimensionality of it. I did the lines on the clear plastic part up top just with elaborate masking and a brush. That was kind of a tedious process, but I think it turned out well. And then the little spire on top was done with a gold Sharpie and then a gloss clear coat. So overall, I'm extremely pleased with how this lighthouse looks, and it has a party trick. If I switch on the power, the little circuit for that is actually included in the Walthers kit. Now it doesn't rotate like a real lighthouse does, it just goes on and off, but it does look pretty cool, and especially in the dark, it very much looks like a lighthouse. Over on this end of the layout, things are still pretty boring because this big open area is still here. That's where the drive-in theater is gonna go. Over here, I did put some bushes up on the hill. I'm not 100% satisfied with how that looks, but I guess it's not terrible. This layout is really starting to come together. Obviously, it's not done. The main thing that sticks out like a sore thumb right now is the ocean, which is just wood at the moment. Now for the water, I'm gonna do some dark blue paint to give it the illusion of depth. I may put a nicer surface than this down first. And then I'm gonna do gloss Mod Podge on top for the actual water surface, and I'll do some wave effects in that. And then there's gonna be a breakwater made up of rocks along here, which I think I'm gonna use Woodland Scenics Talus for. I thought about using actual gravel, but I don't want to make it too heavy. I've also figured out what I'm going to do for the town back here. These are Walthers Instant Buildings. They're two-dimensional building flats printed out on cardstock. I'm actually going to scan these before I install them on the layout because Walthers is discontinuing these and I want to preserve them for posterity. So there's two sides to this. There's this, and then this is a separate sheet, and that has more street. And there's a few alternate signs on here, but I'm thinking what I might do is scan these, digitally change the signs for my own fictional town, and then print that version out and use it instead. Or I might use this, I'm not sure. These also need to be cut out and mounted to a hard surface, otherwise they'll be all floppy. So that's pretty much the state of the layout as it stands right now. I am really pleased with how it's all coming together. I do still need to weather the track. I think I've figured out how I'm gonna do that. I've done a few test pieces where I just laid track on scraps of foam core and then ballasted and weathered it, and I think this is the one that I like best. The weathering is a little bit heavy, but I think it doesn't look too bad, and that's basically what I'm gonna do on this. It's just sort of an alcohol wash made out of brown paint mixed with rubbing alcohol. It goes on very easily. It's not too precise of a process, and it just sort of makes this look like trains have been running over it and leaving dirt and grease behind. So I think under this lighting, this is pretty good looking weathering, even if it is a little bit heavy. Now there is one final little fun thing here. In my previous video, somebody pointed out that I had a Bachmann Thomas & Friends passenger car sitting around on the layout, and I did, and it got me thinking about what to do with it. Now I thought about just like using it to practice weathering on or something like that, but I realized it had a very unique four-wheel chassis that none of my American HO stuff does, and that gave me an idea. Because I've always wanted to do a camera on a flat car that could go around the layout and get an engineer's eye view. But every time I've tried to do that before, the smallest camera I have is a GoPro, and it makes most HO flat cars wobble a lot and fall over. But the four-wheeled platform doesn't have the ability to rock back and forth, so I thought that might be a little bit more stable. So, with a weight to stabilize it, I mounted a GoPro on the base of that passenger car. I took the top half off, and it actually rolls pretty well, and it's very stable. So now I have my engineer's eye view camera car. I attached a coupler to the front of this, so we can actually couple an engine to the front of it and get sort of a view over the top of the engine as it goes around the layout. So let's do that. works pretty well. Maybe I'll make that a regular feature in these update videos. Every time I make a major change to the layout, we'll run that around again so you can see it from a more or less scale eye view. I know it's a little bit higher than scale. Alright folks, well that just about wraps up this update video. Lots of stuff is still happening. This is not by any means done, but it is moving along at a breakneck pace, and hopefully there will be another update soon with more interesting stuff. Until then, thanks for watching.